Why don't you go ahead, Bill?
Yeah, 20 of us, and I think, yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. And again, add your information to our networking Google Sheet. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon for our 27th session of the Journey Down the Clackamas. We'll go until early May. I'm Bill Monroe, board member of the Clackamas River Basin Council. And joining me tonight is Todd Bartlett, the chair of the council, who is assisting with technical aspects. And before we get into the program, a few items. Since its founding 26 years ago, the Basin Council has worked as a non-governmental group of stakeholders to protect and improve the Clackamas River Basin and its tributaries. Our mission is to foster partnerships for clean water and improve fish and wildlife habitat and the quality of life for all of those who live, work, and recreate in our watershed. On behalf of the Basin Council, I'd like to thank our two gold sponsors, Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative and Clackamas Water Environment Services, and thank our bronze sponsors, Clackamas Water Providers, the Geological Society of the Oregon Country, Port Blakely, and Metro. Thanks also to the many individuals who have donated to support this conference. We continue to seek additional donations, which are tax deductible for those of you who are interested. The Clackamas River Basin has been occupied by Native peoples for millennia, of course. It was originally the territory of the Clackamas, Chinook, Molalla, Kalapuya, and other peoples, and is currently recognized as lands of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde, the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs, and other Native peoples who may not be federally recognized. We thank those who came before us for their stewardship of these lands and waters, and those who continue to steward them now and into the future. We're gathered for this journey down the Clackamas to learn in-depth information. With that, let's begin our presentation for this afternoon. You can type your questions into the chat and keep yourself muted. And you also have an option down there to raise a hand if you have a question of Bruce during the presentation. Please, if you're not involved in asking a question, keep your cameras turned off. It helps us with our bandwidth. The webinar will go until, well, close to 3 and with questions, and we'll just, that includes questions. We'll just see how it goes, but we're certainly here to make sure that all of your concerns are met. The presenter today is Bruce Zoellick, Fisheries Program Manager for the Mount Hood National Forest, where he assists the forest staff in implementing aquatic restoration projects in the Upper Clackamas River Basin, as well as the Upper Sandy River and West Fork Hood River. Bruce has more than 25 years experience in the fisheries habitat and restoration work of the Columbia and Snake River Basins, and has worked with the Fish and Wildlife Service, BLM, and now the Forest Service. During his decade with the BLM, he produced major restoration projects in the Sandy River Basin before taking his job 2 years ago with the Mount Hood National Forest. Please welcome Bruce as he presents about advanced stream restoration and protection practices, the biological aspects. Take it away, Bruce. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Bill. It's a pleasure to be here today. River restoration is one of the most rewarding things I've worked on in my career, and I'm happy to talk about it today. I'll share my screen and we'll get going here. So, just a second here, technical difficulties. I was gonna turn my camera off so that the video isn't so jumpy. Just a sec here. There we go. Got the video off. All right. So I'm used to running federal software teams. So this messing around a little bit here with Zoom, but I'll get it here. Just a sec.
There you go, Bruce. Try it.
All right, here we go. So today I'll be discussing adding wood to large rivers to restore river and floodplain habitats, largely from the perspective of working on projects to restore salmon and steelhead habitat in the Sandy River Basin. And today I'll be focusing my talk on important ecological and biological roles that large wood plays in large rivers. And a central message to this presentation is that there is a risk-reward relationship to placing wood in channels so that it interacts with the river at low flows to maximize biological responses. And if you look at the top photo here of the Salmon River at a base flow in the winter, you know, it doesn't look like that's that tough to add wood to this channel. It seems like that'd be a relatively easy thing to achieve. However, the lower photo is the river at just a 3-year flood stage, and it indicates more clearly that the addition of wood to large channels is not that easily accomplished. Considerable thought and design needs to go into adding wood to large rivers to provide ecological function through time. Today, I'll be covering 4 main topics relative to restoring large wood to large rivers. First, the role of wood that it plays in large rivers, the effect of wood size and the geomorphic setting on stable accumulations of wood in large river systems. Third, I'll be talking about how do you add large wood? How do you restore it to channels? The wood jam designs and important design considerations that you need to take into account. And lastly, I'll be discussing ecological and biological responses to the addition of large wood. My presentation today is largely based on the restoration projects that I worked on with the Sandy River Basin partners for over 10 years, and particularly on the Salmon River, which is a large tributary to the Sandy. The Freshwater Trust, the BLM, U.S. Forest Service, and the Portland Water Bureau played large roles in the restoration work occurring on BLM lands and Forest Service lands on the Salmon River. For those of you that saw Brian Baer's presentation 2 weeks ago as part of the Journey Down the Clackamas seminar, Brian played a huge role in the design and implementation of many of the Salmon River examples you'll see today in my presentation. Let's discuss the Sandy Basin a little bit and contrast it with the Clackamas. This is a map of the Sandy River Basin. It drains the western slopes of Mount Hood. The Sandy River Basin is 1,300 square kilometers in size. And the Salmon River Basin is shown here in the cross-hatching. The Salmon is a large river itself with a basin area of 250 square kilometers, or slightly more than 100 square miles. For comparison, the Clackamas River Basin is 2,400 square kilometers in size, and the Upper Clackamas Basin upstream of the USGS gauge site at 3 Links is 1,200 square kilometers. So the Upper Clackamas is about equal in size to the entire Sandy River Basin. So let's jump into the role of wood in large rivers. Large stable wood jams result in fundamental geomorphological effects at both the channel unit, channel reach, and valley segment scales. At the channel unit scale, wood jams result in large scour of pools and also result in the deposition of gravel bars, either headward or in the lee of jams. The photo on the left shows an extensive gravel bar that formed in the lee of the jam that was constructed. At the channel reach scale, wood jams increase the overall channel width by breaking up the main channel flow into multiple channels and decrease channel and depth and slope at the reach scale. This is due to wood jams forming obstructions, resulting in multiple channels being formed, and facilitates maintaining of side channel habitat and connecting up floodplains. And this photo is a side channel that was reconnected on the Salmon River. You're looking at the downstream end of a bar apex jam that was constructed to split flow, and the main river channel is in the background of the photo. At the valley segment scale, large wood jams create large sediment and debris reservoirs and often elevate large sections of the channel bed. This results in inducing flows to inundate older floodplain surfaces with greater frequencies, and also initiates the carving of new channels elsewhere on the valley floor. In this kind of meandering of the river through the floodplain and bouncing off wood jams results in both the protection of existing patches of forest and the development of new floodplain forests on the bars and the islands in the lee of wood jams, which facilitates forest succession on the valley floor. So restoring wood to rivers, there's two important considerations. First, the size of wood and its effect on stability, how long that jam stays in place. And second is the geomorphic setting. Where do wood jams form that are persistent through time on large channels? We know quite a bit about this from the work of Tim Abbey and Montgomery on Olympic Peninsula streams. And you can use this relationship between key piece, use this relationship between key piece size and channel size from their work to calculate the size of a key member, which is a piece of wood large enough to form a stable wood jam. And stability is dependent both on the diameter and the length of the wood relative to the bankful depth and width of the channel, as shown in this graph. And I won't get too much in the details of this graph, but the take-home message is that for large channels, you essentially need an old growth tree to become that key piece that creates a stable wood jam. The Salmon River is shown here as an example of a 250 square kilometer basin and a bankful width of 45 meters and a bankful depth of about 1.6 meters. You would need a 4-foot diameter tree, minimally 60 feet long, to expect it to stay in place and form a wood jam. And so when you're dealing with basins even bigger than the Salmon River, like the Sandy and the Clackamas, you're talking about old growth trees 6 to 8 feet in diameter to be a key piece to form a stable wood jam. Next, let's look at natural systems and where do wood jams form. Again, this is work from work of Tim Abbey and Montgomery on Olympic Peninsula streams. On the y-axis, the number of jams per kilometer is plotted versus the drainage area of the basin on the x-axis. For large basins and channels, most wood is mobile, as shown in the gray area of the graph. Contrasted to basins of about 25 square kilometers or less, most wood is stable because of the small channels don't have the power to move that wood. For basins greater than 100 square kilometers in size, stable wood jams form and are retained at only two general geomorphic settings, at bar apex jams and meander jams. Again, the example for the Salmon River in the Sandy Basin is plotted here as the red star, a basin of about 250 square kilometers. And again, you would only expect two types of jams to form here in that river and maintain stability through time. That's at bar apex jam sites and meander jams. When you talk about the main Sandy Basin or the Clackamas Basin, they'd be off the chart to the right. They're greater than 1,000 square kilometers in size. The other general take home from this map or graph is that the number of jams per kilometer of a river decreases with basin area. So let's take a closer look at the two important jam types and geomorphic settings for large river channels. And this again is from Abbey and Montgomery's work. The diagrams on the left are a plan view and side view of a bar apex jam. This jam forms by a large old growth tree being racked on the point of a bar, and then it racks oblique members to the sides and also smaller wood across the face of the jam, perpendicular to flow. This results in a formation of a crescent-shaped pool headward of the jam, and also an arrow-shaped bar tends to develop in front of the jam, and then a bar develops in the lee of the jam. On the right side of the slide, you can see this is a aerial photo of a bar apex jam on the Queets River, formed by a large tree, racking wood that's in transport. So here's a diagram from Abby and Montgomery again of a meander jam. This jam forms on the outside meander just before the river turns the point bar. And again, key pieces are old growth trees that form on the outside of the meander parallel to the flow. And then they rack smaller pieces of wood across the faces of these large key pieces that are parallel to the flow and form that large wall of wood that you can see in the side view sketch on the lower part of the slide. That wall of wood, as the river goes around the outside of the meander, creates a great scour pool for adult holding and then juvenile rearing. And again, on the right side of the slide is an aerial photo of a naturally formed meander jam on the Queets River. So there's a subset of meander jams that I'll just discuss briefly, and that these are bank deflection jams, and they differ from the meander jam in that the trees are delivered on site. Essentially, the river avulses into a bank line where there are large trees, and those trees fall in on site to form this jam. In a simplified jam classification, we group this jam type with the meander jam, because in the disturbed basins where we are usually working, the distinction of how this jam forms is unimportant, because it's highly unlikely we'll have large enough trees on the floodplain to naturally form this jam. Again, on the right is an aerial photo of a bank deflection jam that formed on the Queets River. So I also included a photo here of the North Fork Clackamas River. This is a channel spanning jam formed by a 36-inch diameter Doug fir that fell across the channel. The bole of the tree is pinned on the upstream side of a live tree, which prevents the key piece, this large Doug fir, from swinging downstream during high flows. And the root fan of this tree is up against the toe of the slope, of the valley slope. And there's some pretty cool responses from this jam. You can see the gravel and cobble bed upstream of the jam is a graded 2 feet, and there's a scour pool at the jam. By the bed, a grading 2 feet, it's reconnected floodplain habitat. In the background of the photo, there's a really complex side channel area that was reconnected with surface flows by this jam. And I just wanted to toss this in as a local basin example, but also to stress that, again, from the geomorphic setting and size information we were discussing earlier, this type of jam is stable only in relatively small basins, less than 100 square kilometers in size. And that's right at the size of the North Fork Clackamas Basin where this jam was formed. So large wood restoration, how-to, structures and designs. Well, the general approach now is for large channels is to construct engineered log jams that are analogs of natural wood jams, but use smaller wood than the key piece that would naturally form a jam on that size of the channel. And we use engineering and architectural principles to compensate for the fact that the very large sized trees or logs are either not available or no practical means exist to deliver them to the channel to construct the wood jam. And this approach also prioritizes placement of constructed jams at locations where wood naturally accumulates on large rivers. So the focus of this presentation is on large wood structures and larger streams and rivers, and primarily in low gradient, moderately unconfined alluvial settings. In other words, depositional reaches. But this is a fairly limited focus and by no means applies to all projects. And many of you maybe have heard of stage 0 restoration approach, as shown here in this photo here on Deer Creek in the Mackenzie River Basin. And this approach, we recreate valley-wide floodplain and allow the stream to form a channel or channels through that floodplain and preload that floodplain with wood. And for those of you caught Brian Baer's presentation 2 weeks ago, this is a subset of the current approaches Brian described that restore the former floodplain of streams that were highly disturbed by past land use practices. When highly disturbed, these streams typically are located inside an confined floodplain that results from the channel downcutting into the floodplain in the response to the removal of large wood and other channel roughness elements. So if you're interested in this approach, Paul Powers with the Forest Service Enterprise team is a great contact. So let's return to the approach of constructing wood jams that are analogs of stable wood accumulations in large channels. A critical limiting factor for large channels is the non-availability of wood of the size that would be required if the jam was forming through natural processes, or the cost of trying to do that. Then to compensate for using smaller pieces of wood, we use engineering architectural principles to make up for the fact that we are using smaller sized wood. And this figure here is a good example of that. On the left is a bar apex jam design by Brian Baer. And you can see morphologically, it's very similar to a naturally formed bar apex jam, but Brian uses multiple 24-inch diameter trees to replace that main old growth tree. And also to compensate for using those smaller pieces, there's vertical members and pilings to found the jam into the bed below max scour depth, because you no longer have that massive weight of an old growth tree that the river cannot move. So then you have to found it into the bed. And here's an example of an engineering design for Meander Jam, again by Brian Baer. And you can see those 3 old growth trees in the natural jam diagram are replaced by 3 trenches that are filled with multiple 24-inch diameter trees. And those trenches the trees are buried into trenches into the bank and down below the bed, beyond maximum scour depth. Then other jam members are connected to the wood in the trenches across the face of the jam parallel to the flow, again mimicking or an analog to the natural formation of the Meander Jam, where wood is racked across the face of the key members parallel to the flow of the river. Let's discuss a little bit about project prioritization. I recommend prioritizing placement of wood where it reconnects side channels and off-channel habitat and restores floodplain connections. In general, these are at gravel bars or points of islands where side channels and floodplains were formerly reconnected or formerly connected to the river flows. These are high priority restoration sites because they are both stable accumulations of wood, and they do these ecological roles that you're looking to do of reconnecting side channels and improving floodplain connectivity. And this photo here is a constructed bar apex jam on the Salmon River that splits main channel flow into a side channel that again has a lot of wood added to it for juvenile rearing. And you can also see in this photo, there's gravel accumulating headward of the jam, that kind of arrow-shaped bar that starts forming headward of bar apex jams. Here's another example of adding large wood in a way that prioritizes side channel and floodplain restoration. This is an aerial photo of a section of the Salmon River that we restored about 10 acres of floodplain and reconnected 2 side channel complexes. There's 3 bar apex jams in this photo that split main channel flows and increase connectivity to side channels. At two of these jams, also large scour pools have formed, and particularly in the lower end of the photo, you see a large scour pool at the jam that's at a point of an island that splits flow. And that the large bar apex jam that you see a lot of brown colored wood that's newly installed, that now has a really big scour pool on the face of that jam. The next priority to adding wood would be to install meander jams that provide high quality pool habitat for juvenile rearing and adult holding. The general recommended approach is to construct jams that emulated stable wood accumulations and then modify that per project or reach specific objectives to address factors that you think are limiting fish production in the reaches you're working on. So you can deviate from this approach somewhat, but the more that you do, the more likely you need extensive engineering or ballasting to construct stable jams. And one thing to note is that Abbey and Montgomery found that in managed basins, they often are stable wood jams that result from debris flows or landslides. This photo, the two jams on the right side of the photo, are examples of that. They're constructed to emulate a landslide. And there is just a lot of boulder ballast in these jams to make them stable because they are not in a natural geomorphic setting that would recruit wood. And what we were trying to do with these jams is to force the river more central to the thalweg so that we could try to get flow into side channels on the left side or opposite side of where these landslide jams were constructed. So there's two real important design considerations when working on large channels. And that is maximum scour depth and also the water surface elevation or stage of your chosen design flow. And maximum scour depth is important because constructed jams must be founded into the bed or bank line to depths greater than the maximum depth to which the channel has energy to scour. If you do not build your jam with founded that deep, the river can get up under it and erode it, and it causes it to fail. Then water surface stage is also important because jams either need to be ballasted with wood or boulders or cobble, or alternately tie the members together to compensate for buoyancy effects at high flows. And potential designs range from extensive connection of wood with bolting or rebar to structures with no pinning of wood at all. Instead, you rely on the architectural principles that when high flow is on the jam, it's actually pushing the wood members tighter together, and then also causes, if any of the wood is, it can pull off pieces without ripping the entire jam apart, such that it's kind of got a fail-safe design. And engineered log jams on large channels, require extensive knowledge of river hydrology and hydraulics. And I recommend when you start on a large river, you should employ or contract with a design firm with extensive experience. And on the Sandy River Basin, we worked with 4 or 5 different design firms, and I can give you names of those firms if you're interested. And that I'd also highly recommend using Brian Bear with the Forest Service Enterprise team. He's got more than 25 years experience working on large rivers and a very successful track record. In this next section, I want to give you some examples of some constructed wood jam designs that have been implemented locally. In this photo here is a apex bar jam, and it's a Brian Bear design. And what I'll do when I run through these is I'll give you my opinion on some of the advantages and disadvantages to these different designs. An advantage of Brian Bear's bar apex jam design is that it effectively adds large wood to channels and emulates where wood naturally accumulates, and in a form that greatly resembles a natural apex bar jam. You can see that by comparing the appearance of the photo of the jam compared to that inset of the plan view of the jam that forms naturally with a large key piece old growth tree. One disadvantage to this design is that unless you really push Brian to do it, he tends not to want to expose that upstream face of the apex bar jam to scour any faster than he has to. And he wants the jam to kind of seep into the river for a couple years before there's a lot of scour on the face of the jam. So it doesn't come with that instantaneous concentric scour pool at the face of the jam. But in recent years, we've talked Brian into doing a more aggressive approach. And there's several examples now on the Salmon River with essentially this jam design with the pool instantly in the front leading edge of it. This is another apex bar jam by River Design Group. It's the advantages is that it's very well founded into the bed below maximum scour depth, and members are pinned together so that it's a very stable structure that's effectively splitting main channel flow into a side channel on the right side of the photo. Another advantage is that the upstream end of the jam is open to flow. There's lots of interstitial spaces for juvenile fish to hide in among the jam members. And when we snorkel this jam in the past, it's always had some of the highest juvenile rearing densities of any of the jams we've constructed on the Salmon River. A disadvantage to this design is that it's designed to be overtopped at high flows, which means it won't recruit wood that's in transport, and wood during high flows will just float over the top of this jam. So if your objective is to also recruit and retain wood during flood flows, that's one disadvantage of this jam. So here's a third apex bar jam design by Natural System Design. This is Tim Abbey's group that he works with. The advantage to this jam is that it comes with that concentric scour pool on the face of the jam during construction. So instantly forms high quality pool habitat for juvenile rearing. One disadvantage to this jam is that it really relies on some post piling construction, which doesn't have as natural of appearance to the jam. It looks a little bit more man-made than some other designs. And a second disadvantage is that the pilings form the highest portion of the jam, so it's not as sticky as if you had vertical or horizontal log members interacting and to recruit wood during high flows. And you can see that in the lower photo at the higher river stage. Essentially only the pilings are out of the river, and they just won't recruit wood as well as something with a more complex superstructure. Here's a Meander Jam design by Brian Baer again on the Salmon River. An advantage is that again, it's got a really natural design appearance to it. And also it typically has another advantage is it typically has high quality rearing habitat right after construction. The one disadvantage to that is that in building these jams, a lot of attention is paid to making sure they're built in a way that they're stable through time. And to maximize the juvenile rearing habitat on the face of these jams, it takes some careful supervision to try to weave in some small to medium-sized pieces at lower river stages so that juveniles have something to hang on to. So, all right, you're excited that you have successfully implemented your large wood project. What kind of habitat and biological responses should you be expecting if you've done your work right? And maybe more to the point, what ecological and biological responses should you be trying to document to evaluate your project effectiveness and provide a rationale for additional restoration efforts? Well, one of the major ecological responses to addition of wood is scour, pool formation, both an increase in pool area and pool complexity. An example of this on the Salmon River, after we constructed more than 40 main channel jams and reconnected 3 kilometers of side channel on a 3 kilometer long reach, pools comprised 28% of the channel, and that exceeded our historic estimate of what the percent pools were prior to construction of 17%. And many of the scour pools that formed on main channel jams provided the most complex habitat in the entire lower river, and that's shown here on the adult Chinook that are holding under the same jam that's shown in the photo on the right. And also this jam had some of the highest juvenile rearing densities of any of the jams in the lower Salmon River. But it's not just the Salmon River, which is a small boulder, large cobble dominated stream where a lot of times you have an objective to increase pool scour. Gravel dominated alluvial channels such as the Little North Sanium River, often you have an objective to increase pool area and quality through the addition of large wood. And in this situation here, this is a section of the Little North Sanium that's in a former glacial lake bed area with low gradient and just abundant amounts of gravel. But what happens in these reaches without wood, the channel tends to become over widened and shallow with little pool area. So our objective here was with the construction of the sinker flat wood jam was to create a Meander Jam that created a high quality scour pool with juvenile rearing habitat with that addition of the wood on the pool bank line. And in the inset cross section graph here, you can see the purple cross section line. The pool depth at the face of the jam is 2 feet deeper after construction than the pool that was there previous to the wood jam construction. And this jam successfully maintained that scour pool through time. And we had hundreds, if not thousands, of juvenile fish rearing on it almost immediately after construction. Another major ecological response to the addition of wood to channels is the recruitment and deposition of gravels. As I mentioned previously, the Salmon River formerly was cobble and boulder dominated, had a plain bed channel, was highly efficient at transporting gravels and small cobbles off site. With the addition of 2 wood jams at this site, those wood jams partition flows, resulting in gravel deposition at habitat unit scale and reconnection of the side channel. It's hard to see the side channel, but it's on the right side of the photo to the right of the wood jam in the post-project view. We saw significant gravel deposition after this construction of these 2 wood jams. But we also see this ecological response of gravel recruitment after wood jam construction at the reach scale. This is a pre and post diagrams of gravel deposition at wood jams that were constructed on the Miller Quarry Reach in the Salmon River. Prior to the project, we mapped gravel patches that were greater than 5 square meters in size, and only one such patch was present prior to the addition of 8 wood jams on this reach. After wood jam construction, the area of spawning size gravel increased from 45 square meters to 259 square meters, almost a 5-fold increase in gravel availability. And the number of patches increased from just 1 at a pool tail out at the top end of the reach to 13 discrete patches. And as a little foreshadowing, keep in mind where you see these yellow polygons of gravel patches in the lower part of this reach. I'll be talking about how steelhead responded to that gravel availability in a little bit. Here's another 400-meter reach, the Woodmania Reach on the Salmon River. Again, we saw a significant increase in spawning gravel patches and area of gravel patch increased from a 3-fold from 155 square meters to 483 square meters of gravel after the addition of 8 large wood jams on the main channel. And in particular, pay attention to almost the channel spanning gravel patch in the upper third, upstream of the 2 wood jams, and then a large linear patch just downstream of a large wood jam at the top of the reach. Again, we'll be talking about how steelhead responded to this gravel availability in just a minute. Another ecological response you should expect if wood is placed in appropriate geomorphic settings is recruitment of wood that formerly was in transport during high flows and exiting the reach or basin. When this wood recruitment happens, it increases jam area and also increases jam cover and channel complexity. So you're adding to the complexity of channels for juvenile fish rearing. In this photo, on the left shows a transverse bar with a bar apex jam that 1 month after construction. On the right side is a photo of the same site 3 years after post-project, and multiple 3 to 5 year floods had recruited wood onto this jam, and it resulting in a 4-fold increase in size. Here's an aerial photograph of a similar ecological response for a bar apex jam that we constructed on the Salmon River near Hood Village. The area of this wood increased 7-fold in size from 23 square meters in size at the time of construction to over 150 square meters of recruited wood. And this occupied a lot of the cross-sectional area of the channel and increased floodplain connectivity to the side channel that takes off to the left of the side channel, or left of the wood jam. And I'd say you're doing pretty good in restoring river processes when you can see a wood jam from Google Earth era photos that formerly was not there. So let's next talk about biological responses to the addition of large wood. So juvenile fish response to addition of wood is well documented in the literature. There's 3 main review articles that kind of search the literature for all kind of the juvenile salmon and trout response to placement of wood. And those are by Roney et al., Whiteway et al., and Roney et al. In 2008. But we also have some Salmon River examples to share with you. In particular, juvenile fish densities at main channel wood jams were 5-fold higher than that at main channel pools without large wood. You can see the photo on the right is just a lot of juvenile salmon rearing on this, one of our most complex main channel wood jams. And also when we looked at juvenile coho densities in the side channels that were reconnected by our wood jam projects, coho densities average 1.2 fish per square meter in pools, and juvenile fish densities average 0.4 fish per meter squared. When you sum this up over the 2.7 kilometers of restored side channels that formerly were dry and not watered, we were rearing an additional 10,000 juvenile coho and 3,300 juvenile steelhead a year in these reconnected side channels. So adult salmon and steelhead response to the addition of wood is not as well documented in the restoration literature, but I'm going to talk about a couple examples that we documented on the Salmon River. Again, here's the Miller Quarry Reach where we built 8 wood jams and looked at steelhead spawning in response to the addition of that wood. On the right side, you can see prior to wood jam additions, fish were only spawning on a pool tail out at the upper end of the reach. After wood jam construction and the formation of those gravel patches in the lower half to third of the project reach, steelhead expanded their red distribution to include those gravel patches. And the mean number of reds increased from 1.3 reds per year to 12 reds per year. So we had a significant response in both number of fish spawning on it and where they spawned on the project reach. And we saw a similar response for the Woodmania reach. The mean number of reds increased from an average of 4.7 reds per year prior to the addition of wood to 20.7 reds per year after the wood jams were added. And again, the red distribution shifted to the upper third of the project reach, and you can see the dense numbers of reds at the 2 wood jam complexes in the upper third of the reach that had the substantial amount of gravel recruitment. So we also looked at adult coho use of the side channels that we reconnected flows to. And over about a 5-year period, we connected up 2.7 kilometers of the side channels. And coho spawner use of those side channels is plotted here in the blue line. And number of spawners increased per kilometer of side channel significantly through time. by the end of the 10-year monitoring period, about 30 reds per kilometer were found in the side channels, which is about equal to the red densities we were seeing in the Wildwood side channel up in Wildwood Park that was connected to river flows in 1993. And during this increase in coho spawning in the side channels, the sandy basin spawner, coho spawner returns were flat. They did not change through time. It's shown in the orange line on the graph. And so this is indicative of possible development of localized populations returning to the side channels, or perhaps is just a preferential use of quality habitat provided by the side channels. So in summary, large wood is key to habitat formation and floodplain connectivity in Pacific Northwest streams and rivers at the individual habitat unit scale and at the reach and valley scales. When adding wood to large rivers, I recommend replicating where and how stable wood jams form naturally. When adding wood to rivers, look at where stable natural accumulations of wood form in similar sized basins to that what you're working in to inform your designs and sites for placement. Prioritize placement at geomorphic sites where stable wood accumulations occur naturally. For large basins greater than 100 square kilometers, there's only 2 geomorphic settings where wood is stable at the head of bars or points of islands, and then again on meander jams on the outside of a river meander before it turns around the point bar. When large wood is restored in stable configurations similar to natural wood jams, it results in significant biological responses both from juvenile and adult fish. Documenting those responses takes time to do, but monitoring a response, that kind of response is valuable for identifying what to do different, better, or just more of when restoring wood to your stream or basin. So I'll conclude my presentation of a picture of the Salmon River at a 7-year flood stage during an early October atmospheric river storm. It's unusual to see that much water when the big leaf maples are still yellow. And so I always thought this is kind of a cool picture. But I'll be happy to answer any questions or further discuss portions of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay. Todd, any questions of Bruce?
Well, I know, Bill, you said you had a question. Otherwise, I haven't seen any come in as of yet.
Sure, ask mine. I have 2 there.
Go ahead.
So I'll ask them. Where was it? Oh, yeah. Todd, Bruce, assuming we've got tons of post-fire large wood available in the upper Clackamas, are there projects in the books for that stretch of the Forest Service's river?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that. One of our priorities watersheds in the upper Clackamas to do restoration work. We identified it before the fire happened, but it's the Cub Creek Watershed, and it joins the main stem Clackamas just upstream of the Big Bottom Reach. If folks are familiar with that, that's about an 8-mile low gradient reach of wonderful salmon and steelhead habitat. So we want to kind of expand outward from that kind of center of great habitat to restore some of the habitat in Cub Creek and Berry Creeks. And so we have a project plan for this summer where a lot of the danger trees that were part of the Riverside fire, we're going to fly those into smaller stream channels so that those individual pieces are stable in those smaller channel sites. And then also construct several wood jams on the lower end of Cub Creek using the design considerations I was talking about today. And we have future plans too.
Yeah, and I, just to follow up on that, I assume Fish Creek has probably got its own downwood projects naturally occurring.
Yeah, we're gonna take a look at Fish Creek. We're particularly going to see, we're expecting a lot of wood to fall in the channel as the trees that are dead start, the root systems take a year or two to weaken, and then those trees will be falling in. And we're hoping a lot of that is added directly to Fish Creek and we get a quick response.
Okay, and then the other question, do you ever consider the use of small wood such as brush and Christmas trees to enhance the use of the large wood projects?
Yeah, that's another good question. I alluded to that a little bit, but some of those, in particular the Meander Jam, where we're weaving wood across the face of those key members that are dug into the trenches, into the bank line, that's where we really can use that small wood and even Christmas trees to weave in along that to create that really fine wood that the juvenile fish really like to sit in among the wood, pieces of wood or branches that are the same diameter as their bodies. And they just kind of disappear into the wood. So yeah, we try to do that. And it's kind of like we're busting our butts to get everything built during the in-water work period, but it's really important to take some time to try to get that complex fine wood in among the lower parts of those jams.
Great. We do have a question from Eric Butler. He writes, do these structures create habitat for wildlife other than salmonids? For example, turtle basking sites, small carnivore dens, mud flats, etc. And are there ways to increase that secondary, in quotes, value in design?
Yeah, that's again, wildlife. There's several bird species that we typically see. Is like, wow, I didn't know that winter wrens love wood jams. So there's winter wrens in particular will move into wood jams. We've seen belted kingfishers use part of the jams for perching sites for foraging. It's not always our desire to have them hunting the juvenile salmon holding in the pool, but and then mink, I've seen mink in among our wood jams and river otters. So yeah, a lot of wildlife use them. There's a recent study by Oregon State University where they actually looked at wildlife use of wood and wood jams on rivers. And a lot of species use, when you have a small enough stream where you can have a full spanning jam, a lot of wildlife species use those jams essentially as bridges. And I just can't remember the name of that report or their paper off the top of my head, but if you're interested, I could forward that recent study to you. That it's really, they specifically looked at how wildlife use wood jams and documented multiple examples.
Great. Are there other questions that anybody has that they would like to ask? Either put it in the chat or go ahead and unmute yourself and ask the question. Jane, did you want to ask a question, or Diane? Isaac.
Yeah, I'll just ask a question, sort of leading the expert, but you didn't really talk much about sort of wood budgets or, where we might stand in a lot of these basins as far as historic wood versus, today's. My understanding is that there used to be a lot more wood in a lot of these basins, and that while wood might be transitory in some of these basins, I wonder what the time limit of transitory really means. Is that years, decades, months, kind of a thing? Because it might provide habitat in those reaches, even if it doesn't stick around for, a long time.
Yeah, I think, the forests are best knowledge of previous wood loadings prior to disturbance is for some of our smaller tributary streams. So we don't have a lot of information for the big channels. My talk was mostly centered on today, but like streams the size of Cub Creek and kind of those 6-field watershed scale basins, we have reference streams that have never been logged or disturbed. And we have wood loadings of up to 100 to 300 pieces per mile in those river reaches. And so like the Cub Creek project we're interested in implementing this summer, we're minimally adding 100 pieces per mile to get up to the kind of lower end of the reference numbers that we're seeing. And then the one that worked by Tim Abbey in Montgomery on the Olympic Peninsula streams were kind of for a basin of about 100 square kilometers in size, which was the Salmon River. There was generally about, trying to remember off the top of my head, there was about 24 jams, apex jams or meander jams per mile of river. And so when you kind of figure out that rough number and figure out kind of the way we're building them, that takes us maybe 50 to 75 pieces to be able to build a fairly large jam. That can kind of give you an idea that you're talking again, even hundreds to 300 or 400 pieces per mile, even in larger river channels.
So I believe, Bruce, that somebody sent something in the chat directly to you. That's a question, so you might take a look at that.
So it's not in the chat for the talk? I think here's a question for Deer Creek on the Mackenzie. I think that may be from Jane.
Yep.
Okay. And Jane asked regarding the stage 0 restoration project on Deer Creek and Mackenzie. Do you have any idea how, I guess, these projects fared, and are they functional post fire on those river systems down there? But as far as I know, Deer Creek and South Fork Mackenzie and portions of those were burned, but that the wood that they added in the floodplain was wetted because of the restoration of the floodplain connectivity, and those projects have still been fared very well through the fire.
Isaac, do you? Okay.
Well, and I was going to jump back to Isaac's question that the number of pieces of wood per mile that we saw in reference reaches. You know, we're talking 100 to 300 pieces per mile on Cub Creek, which has an active bankful channel of 30 to 40 feet in the lower end of the basin and 20 feet or so in the upper end of the basin. And from our stream inventories, we're only seeing 2 to 25 pieces per mile. So we're just at a fraction of the wood that was there historically.
Yeah, I was just unmuting to say that as far as a fire and these large wood structures, so the Dowdy Road fire burned over part of our Eagle Creek structures that were put in that were really sort of meander and apex jams, and they appear no worse to wear. The logs, scarred, got a little bit of blackening on them, but they don't appear to be impacted in any material way from the fire.
That's great to hear, because two of the wood jams that I worked on in the Lenore Sanium, it's a little different situation there. That fire was really hot, the Beachy Creek fire, when it swept down the Little North Sanium River. And it burned up almost all the wood that was above grade, that wasn't buried essentially into the bank. So I never thought I would see one of the projects I worked in affected so significantly by wildfire.
Well, I don't see any more questions. Bruce, thank you for this wonderful presentation. I'm seeing some comments about a great presentation, excellent job in the chat. So please take those with you. And for me, not knowing a lot of the physics around construction, I learned quite a bit today. So I thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed it. It's great to meet folks and be able to have a chance to talk about some of this fun stuff.
Bill?
And we also thank you, Bruce. This is Bill. A few announcements before we sign off here. Our next session will be on April 5th at, instead of afternoon, it'll be back in the evening at 6 p.m., continuing our series on water and fish, focusing on the fun and fascinating world of beavers and wetlands. You can use the same Zoom meeting link, and you're already registered for the event. We'll send a reminder on the email of the day before.
Bill,
So,
can duck
Todd,
fans attend?
And what?
Can duck fans attend since it's focusing on beavers? Sorry.
Ducks are always welcome. The beavers will get them sooner or later, but yes, ducks are welcome because they're a pretty key critter in beaver ponds. But okay, and we'll send you a thank you email with these links, as well as a link to the recording and more information about getting continuing education units, CEUs, from Clackamas Community College. Our thanks to Bruce Zoellick for tonight's encouraging and educational program this afternoon's. We also thank our gold sponsors, Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative and Clackamas Water Environment Services, and bronze sponsors, the Clackamas River Water Providers, Metro, Port Blakely, and the Geological Society of the Oregon Country, who are helping us keep this conference free for all of you with their support. Every little bit helps, so if you like what you see, please consider a small donation. Thanks for joining us tonight. Let us know what you thought of the program, and we'll see you on April 5th in the evening. Thanks all.